What was happening at that time was, of course, you had all the unrest about Vietnam, and things were wild in the streets. They really were.
It's chaos, every guerrilla for itself.
And at the same time, we discovered this heavy influx of real high-quality heroin coming in. And it was killing a lot of people because the junkies weren't used to the high quality that they were putting in their veins. And that was an epidemic up and down the coast. So while all this craziness was going on about the war, we were losing people because of heroin, which ironically, we later found out was coming from right where the war area was. The Golden Triangle, they called it. Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam.
Fundamentally, Vietnam was setting up, one of the biggest waves of drug problems which came through and out of the army. So these guys were then coming back into New York. They needed the heroin, and so Frank says, I got to supply the heroin. So it grew exponentially.
Soldiers have access to the drugs at many rest and relaxation spots in Bangkok, Saigon, and other areas throughout Vietnam and Thailand.
I saw on the TV and stuff where the guys over there getting high, the Vietnam veteran getting high for cheap.
One of the things he used to talk about was backtracking. He would put himself in a room, take out all the furniture, televisions, everything, and sit there for a month or so. And he said he sat for a month or two. He'd have one meal a day or walk the beach and just track back. And everything he's done, what he learned from Bumpy, and he just worked his way all the way back. And then he said he worked his way all the way forward to that moment.
And when you do that, there ain't too many people gonna beat you out. You can do just put in here what you want to do. If you really think about what you want to do, I mean, really get it together in your mind. I mean, really get it together in your mind. You're on your way. I went over there and went to Bangkok, stayed there for a couple of months and made my connection.
I want to go get it where they go get it from. I want to go to the source.
So you're going to get it yourself?
Why not? Huh? I came this far.
They said, no, they didn't want me to go, but I insisted. They took me. We had 28 mules and I think 32 guys. And they had, sawed-off machine guns and that kind of, they had a lot of weapons and stuff. It took us about 2 weeks to get up in there. Get up into the Golden Triangle where they had that. It was all built around, and you had to go through the mountain. When you got out there, they had open fields. Nothing but poppy fields back there, nothing but poppy fields. All the procedure back there where you make the heroin with. We came out there with, I think it was 200-something keys.
50 grand. It's gonna cover them and the pilot and the boys on the other end.
Give him 100.
50 gonna cover it, Frank.
Give him 100, give him the whole thing. Yep.
He took me out to the airport, met some brigadier general, somebody one star on the shoulder, made a deal, and he got it back to the States for me, and I went to Seymour Johnson Airfield to pick it up in Goldsboro, North Carolina. First time I bought over, I think it was 300, and then I graduated up to 3,000 keys. I could bring that over at the time. They didn't care how much you put on the plane. You give them 125,000. I have paid them much of 200 grand. But once you do that, they don't care how much you put on the plane.
I think that Frank Lucas was one of the toughest guys in the ghetto. I wouldn't want to say how many people he killed and how he killed them, but he's just a really rough guy, and became, a mafia type leader.
If they respect you, that's good. That you ain't getting no money to respect you. If they fear you, that's when you get paid. When they fear you, that's when you get paid.
Frank combined that toughness with intelligence. He was smart. He was careful. And that's a tough combination to beat in a criminal, if you're tough and smart at the same time, and he was. That's why he was able to build up the empire as he did.
I'd sit and chat with him and say, were you ever intimidated? He said, by what? I said, well, flying into Saigon, in the middle of a world war, a crisis, going to meet these guys who could just as soon as put a bullet in your head and drop you in a hole somewhere, and you'll never come back to Harlem. Were you never worried by that? He said, why? And so I think right there you've got the fact that Frank hadn't even thought about it. Would you call that charming? He's charming. Some people might put the word on it of a sociopath, but there's definitely a coolness that makes a man like that tick.
The Special Narcotics Bureau in Washington is not a dog and pony show. They are sincere. I know this because they want us to orchestrate it, and I want you to head up things here on our end.
Those strike forces were set up to try and find out where the drugs were coming from, who was bringing them in, and that was our mandate. Not small stuff. We didn't deal with any street stuff. We didn't deal with marijuana. I mean, if we did coke jobs, but primary emphasis was to locate and destroy these heroin guys.
But Red Top was a wonderful woman. She was my whole bloodline. She did everything. I didn't have to worry about it. All I had to give her 20 keys and tell her what to do, and she did it. She would cut 10 cents and leave a 9-cent change, you know. She was that good. Without my wholesale, that's not kind of my wholesale. Forget that. I'm making $1 million a day in the street. Quality was so much better than anybody else. They couldn't keep up with me. My quality was like at least 10%. That's at least it was. They couldn't do nothing but a 5 or 3 or 4 or 5%.
We had something called the double dragon. You could take one key, it's like 98% pure. Take one key, you break it down, you make 3 keys out of it. You know, if you break it down quarter-wise and put it out in the streets, you take one key, coming back to like $1.5 million. We got 35, we got 15 crew members out in the street, 15 different crews out in the street. We coming up with anywhere from $2.5 to $3 million a day easy. The hardest part in the world, the way it was, is to hide the money. Wasn't no problem getting it, hiding it.
You look great, wonderful, wonderful.
The fashion and the girls and the cars and the money that I would see laying around, things that I would see. You know what I'm saying? It was exciting. It was exciting to me. And I thought I wanted to be a part of that. You know what I'm saying? And I did become a part of that. Things that I was seeing, I thought that was for me. But later on in life, I found out it wasn't. You know what I'm saying? But I thought that was for me.
I grew up in New York, and I remember those streets where his drugs were being sold. I remember the name of them. I can remember 116th just being packed at night. I didn't know it was because a guy I was going to meet 35 years later was supplying everybody with drugs.
Like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I bet you there was at least 10,000 people out there trying to get. I'm telling you, like people going to the ball game, like Yankee Stadium. That's what they were trying to get to that heroin. I come out, they were trying to get to it. The junkie would tear you to pieces if you got in there. They ain't no, police, they come out there, they had to have a tank, armored tank to come up in there with. I could go out there with 25,000 quarters at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And at 9 o'clock, I wouldn't have a damn gram, not a gram. I got my $1 million, I'm gone.
He didn't want to work for other people. He didn't want to pay a surcharge to other people. He didn't see the middleman as something he wanted to, he didn't believe in that. He had this sort of dream of corporate America, and that even though he was in the heroin business, that the paradigm of corporate America and that architecture was sort of a submodel or microcosm of everything else, including the world of drugs.
When Frank was doing it and selling his dope, and by the way, he never took any of that stuff. You got to remember that. It was a commodity to him. He was so cold and so analytic. It was a commodity. He didn't think in terms of kids throwing it. He didn't care. Let's put it that way. He was just selling a commodity, which he did not partake in. And he loved the fact that people were using it.
It was sold as True Blue in the city and Blue Magic in Jersey. What had happened was we discovered that the local dealers were being forced out. They were being forced off the streets. And these new guys were coming in. And they were selling Blue Magic. We bought some, we bought a lot of it, and New York was True Blue.
Me and my brothers and nephews down out of Newark, we started our own thing. No dealing with Frank whatsoever. People used to call us country boys, this and that, because I have an ancestor from North Carolina.
A lot of the new dudes on the block had Southern accents. We found out through our own investigation that they call themselves the country boys. That was Lucas's. They were all related. Cousins, third cousins, nieces, nephews, everybody. We knew about them, but we knew that they still weren't. Somebody was on top of them.
The signature idea and image of the movie is body bags traveling into America from Vietnam loaded with heroin.
Open it. I'm not doing that.
That was me and a partner of mine idea to get somebody to go and build a cassette over there with false bottoms in them, to put the stuff in false bottom cabinet. A lot of guys were coming back then and got killed over there. And we took him, we sent him over there, he built the casket, we swapped the caskets. Yeah, I think it was 32 caskets we had. With like 4 or 5 keys in a piece. You know, it had false bottom on it. They took the damn plane apart. Took it apart. Skinned the plane and everything. And that's when the Joint Chiefs of Staff almost got rid of DEA then. Because they messed their plane up real bad, you know. They messed up real bad. They didn't find nothing. They didn't have no dog. Just searching, you know, just searching. They couldn't find it. It was in the casket, in the false bottom.
They would intercept the body bags that were to be buried. Would take, some of them were just heroin, and some of them were heroin with the body. And they brought them out, the stuff out from there every way they could.
What interested me in the story was not to glorify a drug dealer, and I told Frank that when I met him. Frank is very charming, very humble, and he'll have you working for him by the end of the day. He's a force of nature. He's a natural-born leader. As he said, you know, if I had become a doctor, all my brothers would have become doctors. He said, I got in the drug business, and they followed me into the drug business.
Richie Roberts also has a very interesting story that I just thought would be interesting. He has a cop story that also defines a world. It was the time of Prince of the City when there was graft that was such a big part of the fabric of that era. This New Jersey cop just didn't want to take money. He was weirdly honest.
The cop in the story is sort of the flip side of Frank Lucas. And that is that Frank was dedicated to an enterprise, the free enterprise. Richie was totally dedicated to his not taking money. Richie would not take money. He actually turned in a suitcase with $1 million in it.
My reaction was, wow, you know, it's $1 million. $1 million was just a number to me. I didn't know what that meant, you know. All I knew it was dirty, and we had to turn it in. I'm not suggesting that there were some that didn't think we should, but we did. Now, was I looked down upon because of it? As the movie indicates, yeah, some guys thought I was a jerk, but others knew me and accepted it.
I think things like police corruption really bother him from a deep, you know, personal point of view.
Narcotics is the toughest job in law enforcement. I mean, tougher than a homicide. You're out there in the street. It's dirty. It's dangerous. And you see people driving around in cars that you couldn't afford to buy the fender of. So it does tend to corrupt, and it did. And Lucas's organization in New York or New Jersey could not operate the way they did unless someone was being paid off. And some guys were paid off.
I think one of the key things with Richie is just everything's contradictory. But he has this belief that somebody has to throw the stones. Somebody has to be the agitator. That you can't just let the person in power or the people in power control everything and say it is because it is. And he got that way by being an absolute member of the establishment, by being a Marine, by being a policeman, by being a prosecutor in the DA's office. And he became, over time, an agitator.
I used to go myself on surveillances up around 126th Street in Harlem, somewhere around there. You could see the payoffs being made. And I don't mean to imply that all cops were crooked, but there were certain squads that were. And Lucas's organization in New York or New Jersey could not operate the way they did unless someone was being paid off. Those were some of the people that Lucas gave us when he was convicted and he flipped.
That's my money.
A lot of police work's just pure luck. You sit and you stare at an object, you know, and you try and work out how this thing, you know, what went wrong or whatever, you know, whatever the question happens to be. But a lot of it's just luck. And you're talking about 30, 40, 50 people, all relatively smart blokes, all staring at the same situation for 5 years, and nobody being able to work out what's going on. And then Frank Lucas, in actuality, in truth, made a single mistake. He wore a fur coat to that boxing match.
It was in Madison Square Garden, the Ali Frazier fight, and he felt the need to not be underground and be conservative, but to be flashy.
I paid $125,000 for a chinchilla coat and $25,000 for a hat. So they weren't gonna beat me that night, just put it that way.
he went to this fight with a chinchilla hat and a chinchilla coat, and he became identified in that moment after 5 years.
He's talking with some of the top mob guys, and they're like, who's this guy that everybody's coming up to and talking to?
And who the hell is this dude? And Nicky Barnes was there and some others. And I started getting information from a DEA guy in New York about Frank Lucas. It's hard for people to imagine, but there was not great cooperation between the agencies back then. Everybody wanted the credit for themselves, so it was hard for us to get much on Frank. But this friend of mine who I'd worked with when I was a detective told me a lot of things that were going down and told me a lot about the police corruption. We kind of finally realized, after a lot of investigation, a lot of intelligence, that Lucas was the one who was bringing in the stuff.
Uniquely with Richie and Frank was that Richie not only was one of the policemen doing the actual investigation, but when he became a lawyer, he became the person who was setting up the case to prosecute Frank Lucas.
The state will show, and you will hear, that Frank Lucas is the most dangerous man walking the streets of our city.
The courtroom was, every day was filled with celebrities, showgirls. Joe Louis was there almost every day. Joe Louis's wife testified on his behalf. We indicted, I think, 43 people. Everybody pleaded out but 9. So there were 9 attorneys and me. And I kind of felt a little bit overwhelmed by it. And when Frank first walked in, first of all, after saying hello to everybody and getting patted on the back, which shouldn't allow, but they did, he kind of turned and looked at me. I was seated, and you know, like a half look and a half smile. And I looked at him the same way. And I don't know, it's just a strange feeling. I had to do him, I wanted to do him, and we did.
It was a big trial, and we had every lawyer, every conceivably good lawyer in the country there. And wasn't nobody but him, and he kicked our ass in the courtroom. He really did. He did a good job in there.
He was very proud of being a black man who was able to rise in a white man's world, be it criminal or whatever kind. And now he suddenly sees what he's done. And there's no doubt in my mind, from that day on, in his mind, if he was going to go down, he was going to cooperate. We debriefed him for days, weeks, months probably, about how the drug trade started, how he got his people involved, how the police started getting on the take, who was on the take, how did that happen. Over 150 convictions were resulted from his cooperation. Most people copped out when they realized Frank was going to testify, because he knew it all. Frank was not only charismatic, he was a very charismatic guy. He also was very, very bright, very, very smart. He had a great memory. He would tell us things. Yeah, I remember on January 2nd, 1962, this happened or that happened. We'd check it out, and sure enough, he was right on the money, the date and everything else.
And me, Shorty, my brother Larry, all us, we were the head of the country board. We were the bosses of the country board. We were brought here, Sterling Johnson indicted us right here as being the bosses, and then we did time for that. Richard had us in the hot seat. He was on our butt ever since '68. Every time you turn around, Richard Robinson and his detectives, they was on us.
Post-trial, they'd uncovered about $270 million in strongboxes. Not to mention the properties, the hotels. I think there's properties in Las Vegas. There was 5 apartments in Manhattan. There was apartments in Los Angeles.
It was a gigantic coup for Richie and a big thing in his career. But also during the course of that, he swapped from being a prosecutor and became a defense attorney. And his first client was Frank Lucas.
I mean, here's the man who puts you in prison, turns it around so that all of a sudden you are now, and he are engaged in getting even worse crooks than you were. And so that bonded them. They almost became, though they did become pals. And in the end, Richie was Richie who was waiting for Frank when Frank got out. Frank spent 15 years in prison, but he had been so helpful in breaking down law enforcement corruption and DEA corruption that the Judge Sterling Johnson, a federal court judge, commuted the sentence, or let him walk after 15 years.
Then we became friends. I'm a godfather to his son. Great kid. Ray is his name. No, godfather.
And that's my godson, Ray.
Hello, handsome.
And they take care of him. They do everything for him. They're in school and everything else.
All right. Doing well in school?
Straight A. A plus.
Their friendship's very strange. I mean, Richie says that never at any stage does he ever forget who Frank Lucas is and what he did. However, this is Richie writing to me, at the same time, I'd much rather have a beer with Frank Lucas than Dick Cheney.
Richie Roberts, I would see him at the back of a crowd. I think he couldn't quite grasp the film was being made about him. And so that was quite charming.
Rich is a sentimental guy. And if he like you, he'll go the last mile for you. He's a good man. I love the son of a bitch, I do.
They're two bold guys, you know, I think that shoot from the hip. They were destined to meet, ultimately, and to this day, they're still friends.
Hey, pretty girl.
If I see him, I'll
Come and get a picture with me, come on.